Hi, my name is Fran Kravitz from PMC in Malvern, Pennsylvania. Welcome to PMC's IRA Express Training Series. In today's session, we're going to be looking at lifetime required minimum distributions. We're going to look at some general rules regarding lifetime required minimum distributions. Then we're going to go through the rules on how to calculate the required minimum distribution amount. We'll look at the penalties associated with failure to take the proper required minimum distribution amount. And then finally, we'll take a look at how rollovers and transfers are affected by the required minimum distribution amount. Let's start by looking at some general rules. The first point that you'll note is that the reason why we have the required minimum distribution rules is to promote the use of the IRA funds for retirement purposes. Now, if you believe that, I have a wonderful bridge that I'd like to sell you. The reason why we have these required minimum distribution rules isn't because the government is trying to encourage you to use this money for retirement. The reason why we have these rules is the government wants their money back. Remember, with a traditional IRA, a SEP IRA, a simple IRA, the funds that have been contributed over the years, in many cases, in fact, in most cases, have been deducted. Plus, the earnings that have accumulated on those IRAs have accumulated on a tax-deferred basis. The government says, okay, we'll let you save this money income tax-free while it's accumulating, but eventually we want our tax dollars. And when the individual starts to take those required minimum distributions, that's when the government's going to get their tax dollars back. So really, we could say that the purpose of the required minimum distribution rules is so that the IRS can start to collect taxes on this money that has been deferred for so long. Now, further evidence of that is you'll notice that the required minimum distribution rules do not apply to Roth IRAs. And if you think about it, on a Roth IRA, there's no taxes due at the distribution time. So the government doesn't care if you never take the money out of your Roth IRA. So as long as you're alive, you never have to take a distribution from a Roth IRA. But you will have to take distributions from traditional IRAs, from SEP IRAs, and from simple IRAs. Now, before we get to the actual calculation of the required minimum distribution amount, let's define a couple of terms. One term that you're going to see come up over and over again when talking about required minimum distributions is the term distribution calendar year. Now, if I were to ask the average person on the street, what do you think the term distribution calendar year means? I think most people would probably get pretty close. Well, it's any calendar year that you've taken a distribution, or it's any calendar year in which a distribution is required, and that's how it's actually defined. The term distribution calendar year is any calendar year for which a required minimum distribution must be taken. An individual's first distribution calendar year is the calendar year they reach age 70 and a half. Now, I find it interesting that as far as the IRS is concerned, those halves are pretty important. You know, we talk about IRAs and we know that you're not supposed to withdraw your money before you reach age 59 and a half. And now we're finding that you have to start withdrawing the money once you reach age 70 and a half. Why the half, you may wonder. You know, if you think about it, when you're very small, the half may mean something to you. I remember when my children were small and I'd say, oh, here's my son Dan, he's 4 years old. He'd get really indignant. He'd say, I'm not 4, I'm 4 and a half. But you know, I never hear people saying, oh, I'm not 20, I'm 20 and a half. I'm not 40, I'm 40 and a half. I'm not 70, I'm 70 and a half. But as far as the IRS is concerned, it's the half that matters. So when does an individual reach age 70 and a half? An individual reaches age 70 and a half on the 6-month anniversary of their 70th birthday. So if an individual is 70 anytime between January and June, then the same calendar year in which they reach age 70, they're going to be 70 and a half. Because if they were 70 between January and June, they're 70 and a half between July and December. However, if an individual was 70 between July and December, they're not going to reach age 70 and a half until the following calendar year. Because again, if I was 70 in July, I'm not going to be 70 and a half until the following January. So the 70 and a half is the 6-month anniversary of the 70th birthday. The next term that you're going to see talked about quite a bit in the discussion of the required minimum distribution rules is the term required beginning date. It's another one of those terms that kind of defines itself. What's the required beginning date? Well, it's the date that something's required to begin. Well, what's the something that's required to begin? Well, we're talking about lifetime required minimum distributions. The required beginning date is the date that the individual is required to begin taking those lifetime required minimum distributions. And the way that the regulations define the required beginning date, it's April 1st of the year following the calendar year the individual reaches age 70 and a half. A lot of people misunderstand that and they think that it's April 1st following the date they reach age 70 and a half. For example, if they reach 70 and a half in January this year, they think, oh, well, I turned 70 and a half in January, April 1st, I'm going to have to start taking those distributions this year. But no, it's April 1st of the year following the year the individual turns age 70 and a half. So if the individual was 70 in July of last year, means they were 70 and a half in January of this year, they don't have to begin taking distributions until April 1st next year. April 1st of the year following the year the individual reaches age 70 and a half. That's the required beginning date. Now, a lot of people get really excited when they find out that they don't have to begin taking distributions the year they reach age 70 and a half. They can actually defer taking those distributions until April 1st of the year following the year they reach age 70 and a half. And remember, distributions from IRAs are generally going to be taxable, and they are taxable for the year in which received, not the year for which received. So if an individual was 70 and a half years of age this year, they can defer taking their first distribution until April 1st next year. They're also deferring the tax until next year. And some people get really excited about that.
Fran, does an individual over age 70 and a half have until April 1st of each year to satisfy the prior year's RMD?
A lot of people have a misconception on that, Patty, where they believe that they have until April 1st each year to satisfy the prior year's required minimum distribution. But remember, this April 1st date is the required beginning date. It's not the annual distribution deadline. An individual does not have until April 1st each year to satisfy the prior year's RMD amount. An individual has until April 1st of the year following the year they reach age 70 and a half to satisfy their first distribution calendar year requirement, but all subsequent distribution calendar year requirements must be satisfied within that calendar year. No later than December 31st of that year, obviously. So if an individual was 70 and a half last year, they can defer taking last year's required minimum distribution until April 1st of this year. But then by December 31st of this year, they're still going to have to take a required minimum for this year, which means in some cases the individual may actually take 2 distributions in the 1 year. Remember, because IRA distributions are generally taxable for the year in which received, not the year for which distributed, if I delay taking last year's RMD to this year, I still have to take this year's RMD this year. That means not only am I taking 2 distributions this year, but both of those distributions are going to be taxable for this year. Now, some people at this point would say, well, wait a minute. I understand that I can delay taking my first year's distribution until the second year, no later than April 1st. And by doing that, I'm also delaying the taxation. But now I'm realizing that I also have to take a distribution in that second year to satisfy the second year's requirement. That's also going to be taxable in that year. Well, if I take 2 taxable distributions in the same year, isn't that going to put me in a higher tax bracket? And my response to that question is, I don't know. You obviously have me confused with your accountant. Maybe we look alike or something, but I'm not your accountant. I have no idea what your tax situation is. I don't know where you are, whether you're up the threshold where taking this extra distribution is going to push you over the threshold and into a higher tax bracket. That's really between you and your accountant and the IRS. All I can tell you is that if you delay taking last year's distribution till this year, and you still have to take this year's distribution this year, you're now going to have 2 taxable distributions this year.